Welcome to today's topic, fueling your tractor. So we have our fuel trailer out. Let's learn how to use it. Before we start using it though, why do we have fuel trailers? Well, they are super handy. When you have off-grid locations, when it's too expensive to move your equipment time-wise, labor-wise, to move your equipment back to your yard, it's often a lot cheaper to be able to bring your fuel out to your equipment. So if you're running pumps for irrigation, pulling water out of ditches or canals, if you're running tractors, especially think about doing heavy tillage, right? You could be running through 100 gallons plus a day, or I should say per shift, and you need to get fuel out there. You don't want to be running your tractor 10, 15 miles down the road to get from one ranch back to your maintenance yard just to fuel it up. So instead, let's bring the fuel out to the equipment. All right, so now you've made that decision, you're ready to bring fuel out to your equipment, but what do you need? Well, when we're looking at a fuel trailer, we have four key things we're looking for. We're looking for capacity, we're looking for mobility, we're looking for type of fuel, and we're looking to meet all of the safety requirements put out there for safe transport, Department of Transportation regulations. So when you look at this fuel trailer, you can see that it's a 950 gallon fuel trailer. You've got a capacity tank that for our operation makes a whole lot of sense. That's really critical. You look at all the equipment you have, you look at how fast you're burning fuel, and then you assess the size trailer or quantity of trailers that you may need in order to run your operation. Next, mobility is a big issue. We need to be able to get these trailers from point A to point B, oftentimes over dirt roads, sometimes over some nasty areas. So you want to look at the kinds of tires, you want to look at the hitching method. Are you hitching it to a tractor? Are you going to be hitching it to a pickup truck? If you're hitching it to a pickup truck, what size pickup truck is going to be required to pull the weight that you need? And does that require a special driver's license? And next, we want to look at the type of fuel, right? So this is a diesel tank. We've dedicated this diesel tank to dyed ag diesel or red diesel. So that way, that is all that's ever going to be in here. Now, a lot of times, modern tractors, we also have DEF, diesel exhaust fluid. So now you can actually get rigs that not only will haul your diesel fuel, but will have separate compartments for things like DEF, or perhaps even your engine oil, air compressor. Really depends if you want a whole service rig or just a fuel trailer. And lastly, we need to make sure that it meets all of the safety requirements for safe transport on the road. Now, luckily in ag, we have a couple of options there, or exemptions, I should say, that don't exist for other industries. So normally on my fuel tank, you'd be seeing flammable, you'd be seeing don't smoke within 25 feet. With an ag fuel trailer, we can get away with just the 1993 placard that's on there, and we don't even need to label it as diesel fuel. So if you were out in the construction industry, you'd have it labeled diesel fuel, you'd have the hazard placard for the fire department, you would have the flammable, you would have signage, you would also have the no smoking within 25 feet on pretty much every side of the trailer that is readily visible. But instead, we're ag, we just make sure we have the 1993 sign on there. It is also a good idea to put flammable, but the 1993 with the flame on the diamond says it all, and you are good to go. So taking off our farmer hat and putting on our normal, just everyday person kind of hat, we're out there, we're able to carry 119 gallons of diesel fuel with no hazmat requirements. In fact, we can pull a 500-gallon trailer with limited hazmat requirements in place, pretty much carrying the MSDS. There's a couple other restrictions there, but the limitations, the training requirements are far less restrictive, up to 500 gallons. We also need to be using fuel trailers that are permanently mounted, where the tanks are permanently mounted to the trailer. So they are affixed down to the trailer, so there's no way for that tank to roll off or escape. That is really critical. And in fact, if you look at the frame of this trailer, the frame goes all the way around, so if somebody were to hit the trailer, they're not hitting the tank. We're trying to avoid spills. And lastly, you should always carry a fire suppression device, a fire extinguisher, usually in the 20B rating series for an ABC fire extinguisher, in with your fuel trailer, just in case you ever had a problem. And remember, in the regular world, if you're transporting more than that 500 gallons, you need to have full hazmat endorsement. You need to go through the training classes, keep that hazmat certification up to date regularly. I believe it's yearly trainings that have to happen. And that hazmat certification is all about the safe handling and transportation and what to do in case of an emergency of your fuels. It also requires making sure that you have a bill of lading, that you have the MSDS, and several other items. All right, so farmers have two exemptions to the hazmat laws. So the first exemption is when a farmer is traveling in their home state on all roads except interstate highways and are traveling between fields or from ranch to field. In this instance, a farmer is also exempt from being trained in hazmat, and that's per 49 CFR 172.g. And they are not required to have emergency response information on their trailers either. And so they don't need to have shipping papers, bill of lading, MSDS, or anything like that during those types of transports. And that's per 49 CFR 172.h. The second exemption is conditional, and it depends on how it's being used, the trailer's being used. So when a farmer's traveling within 150 miles of their home, or I should say of their farm, and they're moving fuel from farm to farm, say they went into town to fuel up the trailer, you have the following two conditions. If the trailer is under 502 gallons, shipping papers, bill of lading must be present. Notice there's no MSDS required there. And your safety placards must be visible on the trailers. Over 502 gallons, hazmat is required. You need to have your shipping papers or your bill of lading. Safety placards must be visible on the trailer. And emergency response information, basically your SDS, must be present. And your hazmat training certification definitely is required, so make sure you have that with you. So by example here, if a farmer had a 990-gallon diesel tank and they went to go fill up their combine, just moving from the ranch to one of the fields, they could totally do that, absolutely no problem, no hazmat required, not a big deal. Now, same farmer takes that trailer into town to fuel it up. On the way into town, they stop and they need to get that trailer repaired. So they make a stop. Well, the stop alone would mean that you need to have hazmat because it doesn't fall within that 150-mile rule that we just talked about, that 49 CFR 172G and H. And because it's over 502 gallons anyways, they would have to have that full hazmat training. They have to have the shipping papers or the bill of lading. They have to have the MSDS. The placards need to be visible. The full Monty hazmat training at that point. Now there are some requirements and some best practices for making sure you are prepared with your fuel trailer. First of all, fuel is flammable. You should always carry a fire extinguisher. Depending on the size of the tank, it'll determine the size required for the fire extinguisher. Generally, a 20B for an ABC style fire extinguisher is adequate for most applications. Secondly, you should always carry a spill kit that's rated for diesel fuel, and in fact is rated for the quantity of diesel fuel that you have in the trailer, just in case you were to get into an accident. Next, it is always a good idea to carry first aid kits in case of spills, in case of emergencies. It's just good to be prepared. And lastly, I always carry, regardless of what I have to. I always carry a copy of the MSDS and then also our pre-use checklist for the trailer, for the tractor that's pulling it. And then I also carry an SOP, standard operating procedures, like we have right there, for how to use the trailer. So, always better to be over-prepared than to be caught unaware. It's also generally best practice to make sure that you have at least 5 foot all the way around the trailer in case something happens, so fire can get in and deal with anything, any situation that may be present around the trailer. Also, remember that your fuel trailers should be 30 feet away from any building. That way, if they catch fire, they are not going to jump, or it's less likely that the fire jumps to the building. And remember that every time you use a fuel hose, it needs to be bonded. So when you look at our fuel hose here, it actually will tell you that it is bonded. And that means that there's a metal wire that runs through the fuel hose and attaches to the metal of the trailer. And that way, when the tip of your nozzle connects with the fuel tank that it is filling, the two entities become electrically interconnected, and it reduces the risk of spark, which is great because fuels are flammable, and we always want to get rid of the risk of spark. There are certain circumstances with bulk fuel transfers. Say you've got a big semi-truck that is offloading fuel into, say, a gas station. You'll actually see that those are also grounded, not just bonded. So the vehicle will tie off into the earth, as well as from vehicle to vehicle. Again, just extra safety cautions because static electricity can actually ignite fuel and fuel vapor. All right, so as we get ready to fuel our tractor, we need to do a little setup. First thing I always do every time I stop the tractor is I go ahead and throw chocks under the trailer because I don't want it moving on me by accident while I'm fueling. Next, I place some trays in places where there could be potential leaks or drips, just as an added environmental safety precaution. Next, I'm going to go ahead and take my fuel hose and I am going to stretch it out to my vehicle. Notice I've placed the fuel nozzle inside the fuel tank. I need to do my pre-operational check on my engine. This is an engine-driven pump that goes ahead and pulls and pressurizes the fuel to send it to the tractor. So I'm going to start by checking my fuel, and I have plenty of gasoline in this engine, which is exactly what I want. And I'm going to go ahead and check my engine oil. I have plenty of oil, so that is perfect. So now I'm ready to start the engine. I make sure it's choked. I make sure it's in the on position. And now with the engine fully running, I am grounded and I can fuel up my tractor. The nozzle should click just like at the gas station when it's done. I let it go, and now I can turn off my engine. I make sure I have a rag available just to clean up any spills that may happen, wipe down anything. All right. I put the cap back on. And this, by the way, is exactly why I have a drip pan under there. And now I go ahead and roll up my hose and go to the next tractor.